As a chef, one of the most important things you learn how to do is how to make delicious sauces, but you can't make a good sauce without a great foundation. Forget pre-made stocks and stock cubes, because today I'm going to show you how to make some fantastic foundations for all your sauces, soups, and bone broths. Not only that, but stick around because I'm going to show you how to take those delicious, rich stocks and turn them into the most amazing sauces that are going to elevate any dish. So let's get stuck in. And first up, the most time-consuming beef stock. So this beef stock will be the base for pretty much most of what we're going to do today. So go to your butcher and ask for some bones. So traditionally, these stocks in French cooking are made with veal bones. Veal bones are really expensive and hard to get. Most places just use beef bones now, but you're looking for a particular type of bone. This type of rib bone has some meat on it, which is great for flavor, but it doesn't have much collagen, so it's gonna make your stock really thin. This here is a joint. This is what you're looking for. All the connective tissue in here is full of collagen. Collagen turns into gelatin once it's been cooked effectively. So the gelatin is what's gonna thicken our sauce, which is what we're after. So you want a mixture of meaty bones with lots of meat on them, vertebrae like this, and then the connective bones, the big joints as well. Also traditionally what's used are these, which are pig's trotters split in half. Restaurants have kind of stopped doing this because a lot of people don't eat pork, which is fine. Now I'm pretty much gonna be eating this myself, so I'm happy to put this in here. A couple of pig's trotters split down the middle. Most butchers will have pig's trotters ready to go. If you don't wanna use pig's trotters, you've got two options. You can use chicken feet, but you will put those in later on in the cooking process of the stock, or ditch the meaty bones and just use jointy bones like this, because there will be enough collagen in here to thicken your sauce. But these things are full of collagen. So they're on a tray. We're just gonna drizzle this lightly with oil, no salt. Give them all a bit of a rub down. Fat will render out as well, but this initial oil is just there to help start it. So how many bones? Well, as a general rule of thumb, if you wanna make 1 liter of stock, you're gonna need about 1 kilo of bones, but I suggest you don't do this in small batches. Do it in bigger batches, and we'll talk about storage later. I like to do this around once a month if I can, but you can do it once every 3 months, once every 6 months, just depends how much stock you use. And I've got a fan force oven set to 220 degrees. If you don't have a fan force oven, I'd bump that up to 230, 240. I'm gonna roast these for about 30 minutes, flip them around and roast them again for another 30 minutes. Let's talk about veg. So the classic mirepoix. Celery, carrot, onion. Then we've got garlic, parsley, we just need the stalks, fresh thyme, there's something else, oh it's in here, bay leaves. And peppercorns. So we're making a meat stock. So we don't wanna overpower our beefy flavor with vegetable flavor, and this stuff will get overpowered. As a general rule of thumb, you want roughly 15% of your bone weight in veg weight. So that's about 7.5 kilos of bones there. 15%, I don't know, call it a kilo. Is that right, Dazz?
A bit more, but that kilo is good.
So onion, take this part here off, the core, the root, because it's got mud in it, but you don't need to peel it. You don't even need to chop it more than that. Into half and leave the skin on. The skin adds great color to your stock. So that's 200 grams. I'm gonna go 2 onions. They're quite big. That's 500 grams already. 2 carrots, I reckon. We don't need to do much to these, just chop them. And you don't want them too small either, because they will just break down. So we're at 780 grams. Celery. I'm gonna wash this, but I'll wash it once I... Same as the carrot, you don't need to kind of stress too much about how small that is. Well, you don't want it too small. And that is all the mirepoix we're gonna need for that amount of bones. So then I'm gonna have 1 bay leaf, half of this bunch of thyme, and I just want the stalks of this parsley. So we're gonna roast that mirepoix with some tomato paste. This here is gonna be our aromats, so the thyme, the bay leaf, peppercorns. So 20 peppercorns. And we've got a head of garlic that we're gonna cut in half as well. I don't like roasting my garlic for stocks, because I think you want decent color on that. If you get too much color on garlic, it goes bitter. So I'm gonna pick this parsley, and while I'm doing that, I'm gonna talk about timing, because it's really important. Beef stock is gonna take 10 hours to cook. You don't want the veg in at the same time as the bones, because the veg will break down and they start to taste bitter and kind of get a bit of a weird flavor going on in your stock. So 10 hours, the stock's gonna cook. After 8 hours, we'll add our veg. After 9 hours, so 1 hour after you add your veg, you'll add your aromats. And then we turn the stock pot off at 9.5 hours, and we'll let that little bit of carryover cooking happen for the last half an hour before we pass it. So there's our aromat bowl. That'll go in 9 hours time. Our veg bowl, we do want to develop some color on here. We're going to do that in the same tray that we've got our bones on. So just a little bit of olive oil, about 3 tablespoons of tomato puree. Just toss those veg in that puree. We'll leave that to the side. Once those bones are out and in the pot and starting to go, we can roast that and get that ready. Okay, so our bones are nicely roasted. We've got good color on all sides. We've got a big pot. Surprise, surprise, the bones go in the pot. Now, whatever you do, don't throw this out. We'll come back to the second, but we need to get this filled up with water and start this cooking. But first, what we're gonna do is put ice on it, and it seems a little bit counterproductive. And then we fill it with water, cold water. Okay, so why do we use ice cold water? We can see here already, what the ice cold water does is shocks the proteins and the fats and brings it up to this top really quickly. The skimming in the first 45 minutes, an hour is really important to the clarity of our stock. So we'll get that heat on, and then I'll show you what to do with these. So first thing is we need to get the excess fat off these trays. So I pour it into a mason jar, and then you can use it for anything really. It's good quality fat. Now the fat's off. You can do this a couple of ways. If you don't want to put heat on your pan, you can just put it back in the oven, or you can turn your element on, put that on, let it heat up. Once it's got a bit of heat in it, add some water, just enough to cover the bottom. Get like a scraper and just make sure we get all that lovely fond off the bottom of the pan. All that stuff is flavor. We want to get it all up. Once you're pretty sure you got all that off the bottom of the tray, simply add that to your stock pot. So with one of your dirtier trays, no need to clean it. Oh, there's a piece of ice in there. They can go in there. Add your veg with your tomato puree on it, and I'd put the flesh side down of the onions so we can get some good color on those onion skins. And then we're gonna get that into the oven at 220 and just roast that for 20, 25 minutes until we've got good color on all those veggies. So skimming, this is one of the most important parts. What we got here is a jug with water in it and our ladle, or the thing we're using to skim, and then the jug for the dirty stuff. So once we skim and we take some of those impurities off the top, we ditch them into our jug, which is gonna go into the rubbish, and then we clean our utensil in the water. Why do we do that? So we're not putting impurities back in. So to skim, take your ladle. At the start, it's pretty easy. It's really obvious. All this stuff here that doesn't look right needs to come off, okay? Once you get to kind of a bit further on, you can kind of push it to the outsides by doing this method. So you start in the middle and you work your way out, and then you go on. You're just taking the very top layer off. The ice has solidified all that fat, and that's why it's coming off super easy. What's gonna happen, especially in the first hour, is we're gonna have heaps of impurities come to the top. So you really wanna skim this pretty aggressively for the first hour. Like you wanna be on there for the first half an hour every 5 to 10 minutes, and then every 2 or 3 more times in that second half an hour. Once you ditch it in, clean your ladle in your water. It's probably better that that's hot water so that that fat doesn't stick to it, but that's all right. Push your stuff to the outside and then take it off. You want the stock as clear as possible. You also don't want to take too much. You don't want to take any of the liquid gold underneath. You're just trying to take off the nasties on the top. There you go. We're going to bring this up to a simmer. We're going to keep skimming this for the next hour. We're going to cook this for 10 hours total. But remember, after 8 hours, we're going to add the roast veg. After another hour, we'll add our aromats. And the last half an hour, we actually turn the heat off completely and let it kind of come down to temperature. Stock's done. I've had that off for the last half an hour, just let anything settle to the bottom. And this can get messy, so I'm gonna put this apron on. We're just gonna pass it through a fine chinois. We're not gonna pour it out, we're gonna pull it all out from the top. And that's so that we don't get any of that sediment that's just settled to the bottom. This 4 liters is the first part of the stock that came out of the pot. And this was the last 2 liters, and you can see the difference in cloudiness. You can definitely still use this, but I like to split it up like this so that this nice clear part I'll use for my kind of French style Bordelaise sauce. And this 2 liters here I'll use for bone broth or for gravy or something like that, we're not looking for like a super glossy clear finish. So there you go, 6 liters beef stock. I'm gonna let these out for an hour, hour and a half, just to come down in temperature a bit before I put them in the fridge. And then tomorrow we'll pull them out and I'll show you what we do with them. Chicken stock, probably the most versatile stock you can have, and it's the one that I always have and use most of the time. If I'm doing soups or I'm doing braises or anything like that, I always just use chicken stock. So there's 2 types of chicken stock, light chicken stock, dark chicken stock. The only real difference is that dark chicken stock, the chicken is roasted first. I only really use dark chicken stock. I don't really use light chicken stock. If you want to make light chicken stock, you basically do the same process that we're doing. You just don't roast the bones first. But first of all, I've got chicken carcasses. This is about 3 kilos of chicken carcasses here. Let's get those into the oven and get them nicely roasted. So mirepoix, funny story about mirepoix. When I first started cooking, I was a young little buck, about 20 years old. I had no idea what I was doing. I called it micropox to a chef once, and he didn't react well to it, but anyway. Similar story to the beef stock. 15% roughly of the total weight. So we're gonna go with about half a kilo here. So I've got 1 carrot, 1 onion, 1 big stick of celery, and then I'm only gonna use 1 bay leaf, a little bit of thyme, and some black peppercorns. Just like before, slice your celery, and then move it out of the way with your Andy Cook's Essential Scraper, which is now available on andy-cooks.com. 1 carrot, also sliced up, push that out of the way with your Essential Scraper, and then the onion as well. Take the root off so we don't get any of that soil in there, and then into quarters, ideally keeping the root parts together so that it doesn't all fall apart. So just like the beef stock, the chicken frames come out, they go into the pot, they get covered with ice cold water, you skim the top and you start cooking. Then in the same tray, you're gonna roast your veg with no tomato paste this time. Just a little bit of oil to make sure we get color on the veg. So when we talk about simmering, this is what we're looking for. It's not rapidly boiling, the water's still kind of quite opaque, you can see through it, and we've got little bubbles coming up. That's what we're after when we're simmering. So this has been simmering for 2 hours, so it's time to add our roasted vegetables from earlier, and you'll see the color that changes with that as well. You should start getting some of those like darky caramel colors come through from that roast veg. So pop that in, make sure it's submerged. So it's been 1 hour since the veggies are in. It's time to add our aromats, garlic, bay leaf, peppercorns, and thyme. We'll leave that in there for another 40 minutes, and I'm gonna turn the heat off and let that chill out a bit before we strain it. So that's the chicken stock done. That's been sitting there just chilling out for 15 minutes. Why we do that is so that any sediment will settle to the bottom. Now we don't just pour the stock out. Put a fine chinois in your container, and then you ladle it out coming from the top. There you go, 4 liters, beautiful dark chicken stock. Just gonna leave that out at room temperature uncovered to cool down for a couple of hours, then we'll pop it in the fridge. All right, it's a fresh day and we're gonna turn all this delicious stock into bone broth, demi-glace, Bordelaise sauce, pan sauce, and a gravy. First thing, we need to skim all the fat off the top of these stocks. You can see, because we skimmed it nicely during the process, we don't have heaps here, but we definitely wanna get the fat off. So just like skimming, pull it back into a bowl. Just look how beautiful and gelatinous this is. This is exactly what we're looking for. So bone broth, what is bone broth? Well, it's effectively a high protein, high collagen snack that a lot of, I guess, Fitzbos love to eat. It's great for your hair and your skin. And there's lots of different recipes for this, but this is effectively what it is. So I'm gonna take some of this amazing stock, put it in here. All we're gonna do is bring this to a simmer. Oh, that's the wrong one. Bring this to a simmer, reduce it a little bit, season it with a little bit of salt, a little bit of vinegar, and we have delicious bone broth. Storage. Now this applies to any of these products, so the stocks or the sauces, whatever. These will all keep in the fridge for 3 or 4 days max in an airtight container. What I like to do is to vac pack them down if you have a cheap backpacker like I have, and they store much better in the freezer. If you don't have a backpack machine, just do it in a takeaway container. They'll last in the freezer for 6 months, a year, no problem. So now our broth has come to a boil and it's reduced slightly. We've tasted it and it's got nice beefy flavor and a good mouthfeel. All we need to do is simply season it. A little bit of salt and a little touch of vinegar. And the vinegar will just help to balance it out. I'm using apple cider vinegar. You can use any vinegar you want, really. Delicious. There you go, delicious beef broth. Perfect for the weekend football match. Much better than Bovril too. Right, demi-glace. So demi-glace will be the base for our pan sauce and our Bordelaise sauce. And this is how I store my stock most of the time, apart from chicken stock, because you're eliminating a lot of water, which you don't need the water filling up your freezer. So take your beef stock, and I'm gonna add most of this to this pan. I'm just gonna save some of this beef stock for our gravy. I'm also gonna add this 2 liters of chicken stock. And I'm gonna reduce that by about 4 times. I'm gonna reduce it right down. So you're intensifying the meaty flavor. And because there's no salt in this, it won't get too salty. So it's worth saying, this is not a classic demi-glace. A classic demi-glace is 50% veal stock, which we haven't made because veal's bones are really expensive, and 50% a sauce called an Espanol sauce, which isn't a Spanish sauce, it's a French sauce, which is effectively a beef stock that's thickened with a dark roux. I haven't seen that made in a professional kitchen in a long time. It feels like a very old school way of making demi-glace. I much prefer to make demi-glace like this. It's far more pure and has a better mouthfeel in my opinion. But I just wanted to kind of talk about that before any of the food historians jumped in the comments and were like, that's not demi-glace. Modern demi-glace. Classic demi-glace, kind of a different thing. Once this is reduced, we can then make our Bordelaise sauce and our pan sauce. And that is our demi-glace done. That took about an hour and a half to reduce down. We started with just over 5 litres of stock, both chicken and beef, and that's about a litre now. I'm gonna pass it through a chinois, which is kind of a little bit unnecessary, but habit makes me do it. You pass stuff a billion times in commercial kitchens. So it's not quite this, like the consistency of sauce yet, but it's definitely, you know, thicker than stock. What does it taste like? It's like really beefy, delicious umami flavor and a good mouthfeel because we're starting to get that reduced. We don't want to reduce it all the way to the sauce consistency. We'll do that when we're making our next 2 sauces. So I'm gonna pour this in here and store it. And this is what I keep in my freezer. So I keep demi-glace, beef demi-glace, and brown chicken stock at all times. But do me a favor, if you've enjoyed this video so far and you don't subscribe, then please click that subscribe button, helps me out heaps. Next up, I'm gonna show you how to turn this delicious demi-glace into a Bordelaise sauce. So as the name suggests, it's a red wine sauce made with wine from the Bordeaux region. It also has another delicious ingredient, bone marrow. If you don't want to use bone marrow, that's also fine. You can just use butter instead of bone marrow when we do it, like we're gonna do in the pan sauce next. If you do wanna use bone marrow, then you're gonna go to your butcher and you ask for some femur bones sliced down the middle. It's pretty common there. You can just roast this and eat it, it's delicious. These are pretty rough. They haven't like been cleaned up because we're not actually serving it in the bone. We're just gonna pull the marrow out. So this has been in cold water in the fridge for 24 hours and that just helps to get some of the blood out, which is all the hemoglobin. All we need to do is to blanch this for like a minute and then cool it down again in some ice cold water. So is Bordelaise sauce and red wine sauce the same thing? Technically no. Red wine jus, I should say, is a bit more beefy in flavor and probably less winey. They're pretty much the same thing. Technically not, pretty much the same thing. Kind of like the demi-glace. There's traditional ways. Anyway. All right, leave that in the ice cold water to shock it, stop it from cooking any further. And we'll start making the rest of the sauce. A nice wide pan. Why do we want a wide pan? Liquid evaporates faster. High heat, beef tallow. You can use neutral flavored oil if you want, not too much though. And then usual suspects. 2 shallots, finely sliced. Half a carrot, diced. Half a stick of celery, also diced. 2 cloves of garlic, crushed. A little bit of rosemary, small amount of thyme. Parsley stalks. Some beef scraps. So we've got some offcuts of meat. Add that to our hot fat. With a pinch of salt. Can't find my scraper. Once your beef's got a bit of color on it, you're gonna add your shallots and carrots. Sweat those down a bit. All right, before our fond gets too dark, we're gonna add our hard herbs, so rosemary, thyme, and bay, along with our celery. Then we're going to deglaze the pan with our red wine. Okay, we're going to leave that to reduce by a lot. We want real syrupy, thick wine before we add our demi-glace. This parsley stalks will only go on right at the end when the demi-glace is in there too. In the meantime, we can get our bone marrow ready because this is what we're going to whisk in right at the end. So this is still kind of raw, but effectively, while we blanch it, is so that we can try and get it out in kind of one piece or thereabouts. So if you run a blade down the side and down the other side, this should come on out. Oh, I almost got it in one piece, but not quite. Got my finger stuck in the bone. Those have done their job. Then we're just going to dice this bone marrow to small pieces, like that size, and we'll place it back in the fridge until we need it. When the time comes, we're going to whisk some of this bone marrow into the sauce right at the end. It's going to give us a lovely, luscious, shiny, delicious Bordelaise sauce. Because this is just fat, basically. Really delicious fat, but it's just fat. All right, I'm going to pop that in the fridge, clean my board down, and we'll wait for that wine to reduce. So our wine is reduced by at least 3/4. It's time to add our demi-glace. So we're going to bring that up to a simmer, and then we're just going to reduce that until we're at the consistency we're looking at. Looking for, I should say. Look at the color, so shiny. So this is reduced by maybe 1/4, maybe not even that much, but it's thickened up nicely. Heat off, parsley stalks in. You don't really want to hit those with heat too much at the end. And what the parsley stalks do is just give it like this really nice like vibrancy right at the end. So put those in and let them sit there for 10 minutes. While that's doing that, I want to show you this little test here. Take a bit of your sauce out and just pour it onto a white plate. You should be able to run your finger through it and the lines stay apart for a couple of seconds. The sauce isn't finished. We're close, but we're not finished. Remember, we've still got that bone marrow, but we're gonna pass it first. Make sure you get it all, because we all know by now just how much love, time, and attention we put into that 1 liter of sauce. Same as before, tap it out, and there we go. Now, some people will put this through a piece of cheesecloth or something to start getting really extreme, but I don't bother. At this point, what you do is if you're not using this tonight, you cool it down and you'll finish it when you are using it. What do I mean by finish it? Check for seasoning one last time and you whisk in the bone marrow. So, fresh pot. So the rest of this I'll cool down, vac pack, leave in my fridge until I need it. Only use what you think you're gonna need into the fresh pot. So we're gonna bring that up to temperature again. Doesn't have to be like rapidly boiling, you just don't want it cold. That's actually perfect. I'm not gonna put any more salt on that. Once we have that delicious sauce up to temperature, we'll whisk in a few pieces of this cold bone marrow. Just 1 or 2 pieces at a time. Whisk that bone marrow in. You're gonna see the sauce go like super glossy. And the trick is that we're trying to get all that delicious rich fattiness from the bone marrow in without the sauce splitting, effectively making an emulsion. And if you can't get your hands on bone marrow or you can't be bothered fluffing around with it, then just use ice cold unsalted butter instead. That is our Bordelaise sauce. So what would you use this on? Beef dishes, like a beef Wellington, or adobe beef, or a fillet of beef, something like that. But I'll keep that base Bordelaise sauce in my freezer and I'll vac pack it into small little pouches, enough for sort of 4 portions, and pull it out. I don't use it much, to be honest, at home, but it is nice every now and then if you're doing something special like a beef Wellington to pull a really special sauce like this out. Bordelaise sauce, a classic for a reason. Can't make a pan sauce unless we've got a pan that's covered in fond. So our steak's cooked. I'm gonna take the pan and we're gonna get rid of any excess fat. Leave a little bit in there. Turn the heat back on, just medium. You wanna deglaze it, you can use anything really. I'm using white wine. So what that deglazing's done, you can see the color of that wine's changed, gone like a pale kind of gray color, and that's all that delicious fond coming off that pan. So heat back on medium-low. Now we're gonna add our demi-glace. Now you can add demi-glace, you could also just add beef stock to this, or if you're doing a chicken dish, you could add chicken stock, and just swirl this until it incorporates into the wine. Worth noting, if you're using stock over demi-glace, it's gonna take a lot longer to reduce. This is pretty much ready. We're after that kind of thicker consistency, not as thick as gravy, but like a jus consistency, or like the Bordelaise sauce that we just made. Then we're just gonna add butter and whisk that in 1 piece at a time. Once our butter is completely emulsified into our sauce, you can see it's not split, it's nice and viscosic. We can plate our steak. And there you go, a pan sauce. The beautiful thing about that sauce, once you know that technique, is you can do it with any piece of meat that you cook in a pan. If you pan fry a lamb rump, you can do it with that. If you pan fry a chicken breast or a chicken leg, you can do it with that. I'd only use beef stock or a beef demi-glace with a beef dish. If I'm doing lamb or chicken, I'll always use chicken stock, the pan sauce. A great sauce really can elevate a good dish to a great dish. Yum. Next up, gravy. Now I like to make my gravy ahead of time, even the day before, and I like lots of gravy. So I don't do it from the pan like my nan used to do, nothing wrong with that, but this is how I make it. I do sometimes, and I'll show you later, get the fond off that pan and add it to my gravy, but I wanna make sure I've got lots of delicious gravy, so I make it ahead of time. So that is about 3 tablespoons of fat that we actually took from the bones yesterday we're making the stock, but any fat will do. If you don't have fat, you can use neutral fat oil. Let that heat up. While that's heating up, those are some beef trimmings. We'll talk about that in a second. We've got 1 carrot that we're just gonna slice, or dice, or slice and dice. 1 stick of celery, 3 shallots. Just slice them, they don't need to be super perfect. And I got 5 cloves of garlic, just crushed, and pull the skins off. Then the other ingredients I got is I've got some beef trim there. Now, if you don't have beef trim, I don't expect you to go out and buy some. It's one of those things, I've always got little bits of beef trim, brisket or something hanging out in my fridge or from my roast. So I always keep it, vac pack it and freeze it and then use it for stuff like this. But if you don't have any, just leave it out. Some tomato paste, rosemary, and some dark ale. I like the kind of chocolateiness, the chocolatiness, is that a word? That's a word now. The chocolatiness and the savory notes that the dark ale gives gravy. Big fan. That's probably too much rosemary. Daz got a bit excited. If you don't drink alcohol, I would either just leave it out altogether, or you could use a little bit of verjuice. Now, verjuice and stout is a very different flavor profile. I'm not saying that they're the same flavor profile, but verjuice is a really great alternative to any wines. You could also use wine in gravy, but yeah. So either just leave it out or a little bit of verjuice. And it's the same with any recipe. If you've got a recipe that has wine and you don't drink alcohol, you don't cook with alcohol, verjuice is a great alternative. Once your fat is nice and hot, I'm only gonna add about half of this meat. You're gonna season this stuff lightly now, but you don't want to get to the end and be too salty. And you want a good hard char on it. Lots of color, lots of Maillard reaction. And I know that looks like a lot of fat, but effectively we're making a roux here. So we're gonna add flour to this, and the flour will absorb the fat and be the roux that thickens our stock. Now we've got some good color. We're gonna add our shallots and our carrots. Now we've got some nice color in our carrots, and the pan's starting to get a bit close to what I would like as far as fond. You don't want the fond to burn, so we're gonna add our stout. Scrape all that fond off the bottom. We're also gonna add our celery, our garlic, and our tomato paste. Now we're gonna reduce that right down. You can also actually get this in there. Don't need to cut that up, just plonk her in. Our reduction's starting to thicken up. It's looking good color. So now we add the thickening agent. So I'm just using flour. If you're gluten-free or someone eating dinner with you is gluten-free, then just use a starch to thicken, but you do that at the end. So you just let down the starch 1 tablespoon at a time with a little bit of water and whisk it into the final gravy product. Stir that flour through if you are using flour, and that's gonna get all tight and you're gonna be like, oh no, I've destroyed my gravy. It's all right, you haven't. But you do want you don't want to see any dry spots of flour here. You're trying to kind of cook the flour out at this point. Now, we add our stock. Delicious beef stock. Really important to stir that through well, otherwise you might get some lumpy bits. We are going to pass this anyway, so I wouldn't stress too much about lumps, but you do want that flour to dissolve into the stock. We're going to bring this to a simmer. Once it's simmering, we're going to start tasting it. What we're looking for is the right mouthfeel, how thick you want it. Some people like it really thick, some people like it thinner. Once we're at close to the consistency we're looking for, we start seasoning it with salt. So we're getting close to the thickness that I'm looking for. If you like it thicker, there are 2 options. Add more flour at the start, maybe another tablespoon and a half, or you keep reducing it down. But what we're looking for me, is a nice mouthfeel. You can see how it's kind of rolling off the spoon nicely. And how does it taste, more importantly? Tastes good. Tastes great, actually. Back yourself, Andrew. Just need some salt. Try not to over season your gravy either. Roast beef can be a bit salty. Not salty, but can often have a good amount of salt. Yeah, stunning. Oh my God. It's crazy when you get the salt level right in a sauce. It makes such a big difference. Time to drain. Pour it through carefully through a fine chinois or a sieve will work fine as well. I don't know why these things are like really expensive. And then we tap. So we don't push sauces, we tap them. Why? Because you don't want to push all those bits through it. We want a nice clear sauce. So take the time, every now and then give it a little shake up in there. There you go, gravy. But we can't really taste gravy unless it's on a big piece of meat. Look what we have here. Oh. I don't know who invented that gravy boat, but it hurts your hands. Oh, look how thick it is. I've got nothing more to say. Now, if you're doing a roast chicken instead of a roast beef, the process is pretty much the same, except you're gonna use your dark chicken stock and you're gonna leave the beef trimmings out. Yum. Well, we got through a lot in those couple of days, and I hope that you've taken something from it. I think the key thing is with sauces is to, if you're gonna commit to making them, make a lot and then backpack and freeze it down. They're gonna last for a while in the freezer. Thanks for watching, legends. Like this video if you took anything from it, and subscribe if you're not already, and we'll see you next week for another recipe. Possibly more beef.